righty, I think we can go ahead and get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today for the Palm Beach County, Florida 2025 Disparity Study Informational and Kickoff meeting happening this evening. My name is Hannah Rowell. I'm a project manager with Griffin and Strong, and I am the primary day-to-day contact for the Palm Beach County Disparity Study. I'm also joined this evening by Michelle Clark-Jenkins. If you would like to briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michelle Clark-Jenkins. I'm the Director of Methodology and Research for Griffin and Strong.
And then we are also joined today by Ms. Tanya Davis-Johnson from Palm Beach County. Ms. Tanya, if you would like to give a brief introduction or kind of overview of today's meeting.
Sure. Thank you all for taking the time to join us to hear what the disparity study consultants have to share with you. The most important part of your participation would be participating in the various key factors or focus areas that the consultant will mention. So thank you so much for joining us, and I will turn it back over to Griffin and Strong.
Thank you, Tanya. All righty, so we can first look over our agenda for today. So first, we will briefly introduce you to Griffin and Strong, our team, and the work that we do, followed by going through the objective and the purpose of this disparity study. We'll then have a deeper conversation about the methodology and technical approach. Then we will go into how you can be involved throughout the disparity study process. And then finally, we will look at the study timeline of this one-year study from when it started this summer up until the summer of 2025 when it concludes. And then we will save time at the end for a Q&A session. So firstly, just a little bit about Griffin and Strong. We are a firm that specializes in procurement research, training and supplier diversity consulting, contract compliance, as well as program development. We are the most qualified team in the industry with 7 Juris Doctors, 2 PhDs in economics, a PhD in social psychology, as well as anthropology. With Griffin and Strong, you are in good hands. We are headed by our project executive, Rodney Strong, who has unmatched expertise, first serving as the director of the City of Atlanta's Department of Contract Compliance, the project manager on the first post-Croson disparity study, and he was also the principal architect of the City of Atlanta's Distinguished Equal Business Opportunity Contracting Program. He was also qualified as an expert witness in 2 cases. We also have our principal investigator, Dr. Vince Egan. He is one of the foremost expert witnesses nationwide, conducting almost 200 disparity studies and successfully defending 6 studies as an expert witness. We also have our senior economist on the team, Dr. Gregory Price, who has 25 years of experience in economic analysis of the disparities of employment, private sector contracting, lending, and public contracting, and he was also recently named one of the top 40 Black economists of the last 30 years. So to first introduce you to the objective of a disparity study, ultimately it is a research tool that is used to determine if there are disparities in a governmental agency's procurement process and activities, specifically within certain race, ethnic, and gender groups across various industry categories. Furthermore, a disparity study determines whether the disparities that are found are statistically significant and if they're likely caused by the race and gender status of firm owners, or if there are other race and gender neutral factors that are influencing those disparities. Disparity studies also utilize the acquisition of anecdotal evidence, which we'll speak about later, as well as current policy procedures and practices, and a law review, which we will also go into. And then ultimately, the findings of the disparity study do result in recommendations by our study team, and if they are accepted, the intention is that they should be implemented as policy.
So why do we do disparity studies at all? And that's because of a 1989 Supreme Court case, City of Richmond, Virginia versus J.A. Croson. It was a contract for urinals in the city jail, and J.A. Croson intended to bid on it and could not find I think it was it was African-American owned firm only who could perform subcontracting services on that because it was urinals, primarily purchasing the urinals. And so the firm asked for a waiver, was not granted a waiver, and so they sued. So it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, for the first time, said that societal discrimination was not enough, or a sense of societal discrimination was not enough in order to overcome the requirements of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, where firms generally have to be treated similarly. So for the first time, the court equated malevolent discrimination with benevolent remedial activities to remediate the current effects of past discrimination. So the court said that the test for this was something called strict scrutiny, which is the highest level of judicial review that there is. This case was not about gender, but in later cases in gender, they decided it was intermediate scrutiny, but nobody really knows the difference between the two. But what that means is that you have to have two things. One, you have to have a compelling governmental interest for why you're creating something that is race or gender based, which means you have to establish a factual basis in evidence. So you have to determine and demonstrate that there is, in essence, disparities. The other thing that you have to do is anything you do as a result of that factual basis, which is a disparity study, you can only put in place what is narrowly tailored to the findings of the study. So it avoids over and under inclusion. So, and then it also requires that we first look at race and gender neutral remedies for any disparities we see, although we don't have to exhaust them before we go to race and gender conscious remedies. So all of this is to say that disparity studies are a creation of the court. They are also a methodology dictated by case law, because the J.A. Croson case told us what we had to do, but it didn't tell us how to do it. So there have been cases since then where courts have said, well, we like that you did it this way. We don't think this is the way to do it. And so we've kind of established our methodology accordingly. Next slide.
Thank you, Michelle. So to go into the disparity study process that Griffin and Strong looks at, so we'll talk about each of these individual elements in greater detail throughout this presentation, but this is just a way for you to overall see the methodology of the disparity study as we go through it. So we first start with our legal analysis, which is what Michelle just went through with the case law review. We then have our policies and procedures review, which Michelle will go into later as well. So then we go into collecting and cleaning the data, which then goes into our relevant market analysis, utilization and threshold analysis, availability analysis, and then the comparison of the utilization and availability analysis, which gives us our disparity indices and disparity analysis. We also have our private sector, or what we also commonly refer to as our marketplace analysis, and then our anecdotal evidence collection and analysis, and finally our final report, which has recommendations that are either race and gender neutral, race and gender conscious, or sometimes both.
So one of the important aspects of a study is that we do a policy review, and we do a deep dive into the county's policies. So of course, in order for us to make ultimately recommendations about what the county may do going forward, we have to know what they're already doing. So we look at whether any of the policies as written present any barriers to minority and women-owned firms. Are the policies they have understood by staff? And we do that through some interviews. And is there a discrepancy at all between the written policies and the practices or implementation of the policies? And then finally, what policies can be modified to promote inclusion? Next slide, please. So after we've done all of our data collection, and there's a lot of data, it's 5 years worth of all payments made to all vendors, bid tabs, looking at bidders, looking at subcontractors, award data, vendor data, over the entire study period. So a lot of our time is spent collecting and cleaning data, but once we've done that, the first analysis we do is to determine what is the geographic market that we are going to be studying. So where are these firms located? So we do that through kind of an exercise, borrowing from antitrust law in terms of determining what Palm Beach County's economic marketplace is. And so we determine that by using payment dollars and looking at where the firms are, where the county spent at least 75% of their dollars. And we disaggregate that by each of several industry categories. So we look at construction, professional services, CCNA, professional services, non-CCNA, professional services, other services, and then goods and commodities. And so we start by looking just at Palm Beach County, and we see where do we get to with just the firms located there, and then we start to pull out until we get to that place where they spent at least 75% of their dollars. From that point on, we are only studying and looking at firms in that relevant marketplace. So we want to be comparing apples to apples. So whatever that is, let's say it's the Palm Beach metropolitan statistical area, then only firms utilized in that marketplace will be looked at, and only firms that are available in that marketplace will look at, so that we're comparing apples to apples. Next slide. So utilization is pretty straightforward. It's who did you spend the dollars with over the study period. There are some exclusions. We take out government entities, we take out not-for-profits, we take out utilities, universities, hospitals, colleges, those kinds of things. But the rest we leave in, and we measure utilization both by primes, so those firms that are hired directly by Palm Beach County, and then we also look at subcontractors, so those that are hired by the prime contractors. We disaggregate that by each year, and that's important so that you can see trends and not just look at 1 year, but look at, you know, if you've had 1 year that's kind of been an anomaly, then it's kind of equaled out by other years. So we're looking at 5 years worth of data. So we disaggregate it by year, by each of those industry categories, and also by each ethnicity and race, ethnicity, and gender group. So we look at African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, Native American, non-minority women, and then a control group, which is non-MWBEs. We do a threshold analysis, which is to look at the level of contracting by award that the county's doing. That helps us to do two things. One, it helps us to see whether the county's doing just a whole lot of big contracts, whether they're pretty spread out. And that helps us to see if contract sizing is an issue. But also it helps us to see, are there a lot of opportunities for small businesses, maybe on the lower end of that spend? The other thing it allows us to do is look at what happens. Is there a disparity when we look at just small contracts? So our disparity analysis looks at all dollars, but then we can also look at when we take out the really large contracts over $1 million, and then when we look at just awards under $500,000 where capacity is not an issue. So the other part of doing a disparity analysis, other than just looking at utilization, is to compare it to availability. And availability is who are the ready, willing, and able firms in your marketplace to perform services. And we take a pretty broad view of that, which is we look at what's called a list approach. So we look at firms who have at least demonstrated an interest in doing business with government. So they've either bid, they've registered, they're certified, they've gotten an award, they've done something to at least demonstrate an interest in doing business with government. And we kind of put all those lists together, and that's how we have what we call a master vendor file. So in that list are firms who do business within the relevant market. They've at least expressed interest in doing business with government, and they're located within the relevant market. And they provide services that the county is purchasing. We also will do a second view of availability by looking at Dun & Bradstreet data. And Dun & Bradstreet is purportedly the largest repository of companies. So it theoretically has almost all companies in it, or so it purports to have all companies in it. So when we look at that, we'll look at whether there's a disconnect between the lists that we have and also just looking at Dun & Bradstreet. That might tell us whether there are some issues of certification, because the Dun & Bradstreet data will kind of have an identification of self-identified firms, whereas the list approach will only have certified firms. Next slide, please. So then finally, the disparity analysis itself, which is comparing utilization to availability. So if 10% of all of the engineering firms in the relevant market are Hispanic American owned, are Hispanic American owned engineering firms getting 10% of the dollars? If they are, then we call that parity. If they're not, and if they're getting more than 10%, that's overutilization. If they're getting less than that 10%, that would be underutilization. But if it's substantially less than that 10%, we call that statistically significant underutilization. So once we've determined that there is a disparity, or is not a disparity, and if there is a disparity, is it statistically significant for each race and gender group, we then test that to see if it's likely that the disparity is caused by race and gender neutral features, like how long the firm's been in business, how large they are, how many employees they have, the education of the owner, all of those kinds of things. And if after we've tested and equalized for those things, there is still a disparity, then we can make what Croson calls an inference of discrimination. In other words, that the disparity is because of the race and gender of the owner. One more analysis we do is, since the marketplace itself is the feeder of available firms to the county, then we have to look at the marketplace itself to see if there's discrimination there. And so we look at things like, what's the likelihood of self-employment in the marketplace? We look at building permit data to see who's getting construction permits. And then we look at whether there are any disparities in credit markets. We've added an additional analysis to this other than what is a typical disparity study, and that's an economic impact analysis and an SMWBE cost differential. An economic impact analysis looks at what's the benefit of having programs like a small minority women business enterprise program. How does that affect the marketplace, the economic impact on your market? And we look at, tax revenue and employment primarily. The cost differential is, what is the cost of having a program like this? Are you getting more expensive contracts? Are you getting less expensive contracts? What is the actual cost of having these programs?
Thank you, Michelle. So the next element of a disparity study is the community engagement and anecdotal evidence portion. So first, of course, we have our informational meetings, which are being hosted this week. This is our final informational meeting we're hosting. We also have our anecdotal interviews. We'll be conducting 50 of those for this study. We're working with a local subconsultant, Jeanette Gordon from MacArthur's Own, who will be conducting the outreach for anecdotal interviews, as well as conducting those interviews themselves. They're one-on-one, 30-minute to 1 hour long anecdotal interviews with business owners to talk about your experiences doing business or attempting to do business with the county. We also have our business, civic, and trade organization meetings. So we have another local sub-consultant, Kellen Coleman from Coleman PR and Consulting, who has been doing an abundant amount of organizational outreach and engagement in promotion for this informational meeting. And then I will also be following up with these organizations to see if anyone is interested in having a one-on-one organizational interview with me, which will kind of talk about some similar things as the interviews, but it's mainly to get an idea of their membership, their types of work that they do, as well as any of their perceptions or opinions about the county's procurement processes. We also have our survey of business owners. This is a really interesting part of our anecdotal evidence collection because it's different than all of the other elements in that it allows us to have a quantification of data of anecdotal experience. So a lot of the other elements are obviously focused on qualitative data, but when you respond to those survey questions about your demographics, your business information, as well as answering some multiple choice questions about your experiences with registration or certification, we're able to actually quantify those experiences and look at them in kind of a table format. So that survey of business owners launches and stays up from anywhere from 1 to 2 months. And that will be promoted and sent out to all of the business owners so that you're aware of that survey and how to access it. We also have our public hearings. Of course, these are open to the public. They are different from the informational meeting in that today's meeting is about Griffin and Strong providing information about the disparity study to you, whereas the public hearing is more about us providing a very brief presentation, kind of just what the disparity study is all about if you weren't in an informational meeting. But then Griffin and Strong sits back and you kind of take the reins and tell us about, again, your experiences doing business or attempting to do business with Palm Beach County. And so it's all about your testimony, your experiences, and anything you would like to share. We also have our focus groups, which again, we will be working with MacArthur's own for those focus groups as well. Similar to the anecdotal interviews, those are not open to the public. They are randomly selected from a sample of firms that get invited to those focus groups. We use these to kind of cap up our anecdotal evidence collection process because we conduct them at the end, and they're a focus group session from anywhere of 5 to 10 people, where we really focus on the themes and concepts that have come up throughout the anecdotal evidence collection process. And then finally, we have our email and social media comments. I always like to emphasize the email comments because if you are uncomfortable speaking in a public forum, if you're unable to attend any of the public hearings or public events, or if you weren't called upon for an anecdotal interview or focus group, but you would like to share your experiences and your testimony, you can always email that in to the designated study email address, which you will see a little bit later. And if you want to provide your comments, your testimony there, we take those into account in the study the same way we would if you were to attend a public hearing and speak about it there. So finally, once we have finished all of the elements of our disparity study, we put together a summary of our findings. So each of those chapters, the anecdotal, case law, the policy chapter, the private sector chapter, as well as the statistical chapter, there'll be individual findings from all of those chapters that are put together. And then ultimately, from those findings, we make recommendations based on those detailed policy review, the anecdotal evidence, as well as our institutional knowledge. So Griffin and Strong in those recommendations puts together our best practices as well as innovative approaches for race and gender neutral or race and gender conscious remedies. So how can you be involved? Of course, be vocal, participate as you're doing today. Attending the informational meeting is a great way to get started, and then stay involved throughout the disparity study process by completing the survey of business owners that we talked about. So once that's launched, if you receive an email or if you follow up with someone and you want to have access to that survey of business owners, completing that is a great way to make sure that the quantification of your anecdotal experiences are communicated there. Of course, if you're contacted for an interview, an anecdotal interview, or a focus group session, and you're able to attend and participate, that's a great way to get involved. And then the public hearings, which of course are open to everyone to attend. If you're able to attend there and share your experiences, then that's a way to participate and make sure your voice is heard throughout the disparity study process. So as I mentioned about the designated disparity study email address, that is here at Palm Beach County Study at gspclaw.com. We also have a designated disparity study website, which is palmbeachcountydisparitystudy.com. So again, the email address is where you can send in any anecdotal evidence you want to communicate, but it's also where you can communicate any questions that you have either about the disparity study or about how you can get involved. The website has a lot of information. There is information about Griffin and Strong. There's information about the study team, the work that we're doing, who we are. There's an FAQ page. And then the most important page is our events tab. So that has all of our public events posted on there, registration links, dates of upcoming sessions, as well as recordings of sessions if you happen to miss a public session. And then to briefly go through the study's projected timeline. So we first started in summer of 2024, back in July, with our initiation phase, where we went through the work plan, we did the data assessment meeting, the kickoff meeting, as well as started to plan our data collection process. And then we are currently in fall of 2024, where we are conducting our policy review. We're hosting our informational meeting. We've launched the disparity study website. We're conducting our case law review. We are also in the process of our data collection from the county. We're starting our anecdotal interviews, as well as getting prepared to launch that survey of business owners. In the winter of 2024 and into 2025, we will complete that survey. We'll host our public hearings and our focus group sessions. We will begin preparing our databases and our data analysis once we have completed all data collection from the county. Once we have ended all of our data or our anecdotal evidence collection with the public hearings and focus groups, we can then start our anecdotal analysis. And then our private sector analysis and economic impact analysis can also start at that time. So in the spring of 2025, really end off everything that we started in the winter. So we're completing our data analysis, completing anecdotal analysis, private sector analysis, economic impact analysis, getting all of those chapters wrapped up and ready to put together our findings and recommendations of the disparity study. And then ultimately, in the summer of 2025, we will have our final report drafted and then ultimately finalized once the county has had an opportunity to review and make their revisions. And then we will have any county presentations that the county would like us to host. So I have a page here just so that you can connect with us. I just have the Facebook, LinkedIn, and website of Griffin and Strong listed here, as well as relisted the study email.
James, Marcella has to go to college and study.
And then I relisted the study email and study website for you here as well, in case anyone missed it from the previous slide. So from everyone at Griffin and Strong and Palm Beach County, we just want to say thank you for your participation today in this evening's presentation. I know I provided the email address and the website previously, but I also wanted to provide my contact information with my phone number, as well as my direct email address with Griffin and Strong, if you would like to contact me with any questions or comments that you might have related to the disparity study. And that is all that we have for you today as far as our presentation goes. So we can now move into the Q&A portion of our presentation. If anyone has any questions for us about the disparity study process or the ways that you can participate or anything else you can think of, then you are free to share that now. Inger, I see your comment in the chat. Yes, there will be a recording of the informational meeting posted to the disparity study website on the events page. I will put the email and website up again in case anyone needs to take a picture or log that down anywhere. Does anyone have any questions about anything we talked about today, whether it be the objective of a disparity study, Griffin and Strong's methodology or technical approach that Michelle kind of went deeply into explaining, or the anecdotal portion, how you can get involved with the disparity study? Okay, great. Angela also put in the chat that you can access the designated website for the disparity study through the OEBO webpage as well. So you can access it through that site. Any questions? We'll wait about another minute. See if anybody has any questions you would like to put in the chat or unmute yourself. Alrighty. Well, if you think of anything, if you think of any questions, comments that you have, of course, you can send that into the study email or my email address. You can access the website, as Angela mentioned, through the OEBO webpage. So if you think of something later that you wanted to ask, then don't hesitate. But otherwise, thank you all for joining us for this evening's session, and we look forward to continuing to connect with you throughout the disparity study process. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.